I'm so excited to talk with Hannah Mary McKinnon tonight. And I hope you start jotting down questions as soon as you're able, because I'm sure she's going to have a wealth of information to share with us. So, Hannah Mary McKinnon was born in the UK, grew up in Switzerland, and moved to Canada in 2010. After a successful career in recruitment, she quit the corporate world in favor of writing. While her debut, Time After Time, was a rom com, she transitions to the dark side thereafter. Her suspense novels include The Neighbors, bestsellers Her Secret Son and Sister Dear, and her forthcoming You Will Remember Me. Hannah will be joining us from Oakville, Ontario, where she lives with her husband and three sons. Welcome, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
You bet. Excited. So I wanted to start by asking you about the transitions you've made over your career and in your life. You're an international best-selling author of suspense novels who lives in Canada now, but in the past, as I shared a little bit about in introducing you, both your work life and the places in which you lived were very different. Could you share a bit, first of all, about where you grew up?
Of course. So I was born in England. As you can probably tell from my from my accent, it's very English. My mum was English. My dad is half Swiss, half English. He was born in Switzerland but grew up in England. And I was born in England but grew up in Switzerland. So when I was one, we moved to Switzerland, lived there for 7 years, moved back to England because of Dad's work for 3 years, and then back to Switzerland again. So although I sound really, really English, I've actually only lived in the UK for 4 years, but grew up as a Brit and sense of humour and everything is very, very, very English. So I spent most of my years in Switzerland, in many of them in the German-speaking part of Switzerland. That's where I went to school. And then when I graduated, I went to Geneva as an au pair to learn French properly before studying business there. And I ended up working for DuPont in the Kevlar department before then moving to another place in Switzerland, still on the French side. And I joined a company that made high-tech motors, and I was their purchasing manager. And at that point, after a couple of years, I stumbled into recruitment, IT recruitment, at a wine festival when I was introduced to two gentlemen over a glass of wine who'd started a company, and that took care of my career for the next 15 years. So yeah, we didn't come to Canada until 2010, and that was because of thanks to my husband, who is Canadian from New Brunswick, who lived in Switzerland for 11 years before we came here.
Great, thank you so much.
Mhm.
I'm curious if you, when you were there in England or in Switzerland, if you dreamed of being a writer when you were very young.
Um, I used to love writing at school. Creative writing was one of my most favorite things to do. I remember, I was the annoying kid in the class, generally sat at the back because I always followed the rules, so they were safe to put me at the back because I wouldn't mess around. And I was the one who'd say, "Can we write an essay, please? We haven't written a story for a long time, please." I was that kid. But then when I left school, it was all about getting a business degree or two, having a career, and writing really wasn't on my radar at all. It slipped off the radar completely. It wasn't something I really ever thought of doing. I had maybe in the back of my mind at some point, maybe I'd try writing a book, but it wasn't until we came to Canada that I actually decided to give it a go. Because full disclosure, I was working full time. I had a very demanding career. We had three kids very quickly. So I know it's a bit of a lame excuse, but I just couldn't find that. Maybe the time was there, but certainly couldn't find it. So I'm not one of those authors who had a lifelong dream of writing and it just gnawed away at their bones. And no, no, but I love it. I love it now. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely love what I do.
clearly, yeah. I'm curious if uh, you were a big reader along the way, and if you were attracted to suspense in particular, or
I was. I read a lot when I was small, and I remember my mum, my dad, and my older sister reading to us, and my sister to me, generally with a flashlight under the covers, and she'd put on these silly voices and read. So I was always surrounded by books. Both my mum and my dad are avid readers. But then I'd say probably for a number of years when my career was at its height, my professional recruitment career, and the kids were really small, I didn't read a lot. I honestly
right.
didn't read a lot. And I did read a lot of suspense initially, my teenage years, and I'd plunder my mum's bookshelves, and she was a big suspense fan too. But then during my 20s, after I lost a friend in a horrible way, I only read rom-coms, really light things where they worked out at the end and everyone was happy.
Mhm.
And again, it wasn't until I started writing again, and I'd written my first book, and I read started reading thrillers again, that I realized that I'd almost forgotten my love of thrillers and suspense, and that was really the place I wanted to be. And I'm very happy that I made that move from rom-com to suspense. It suits me, I think. Although I'm very happy and jovial. People say,
Yeah, right, right, right.
yeah, it's quite
What,
funny.
so what prompted exactly that? I mean, if you were having this successful career in recruitment, I'm curious exactly what it was like. First of all, how you made this big decision, this big leap, and what that process was like, making that transition and
It
kind of
was
claiming it.
it was probably one of, certainly professionally, the most difficult decision I had ever made. When I was young, my goal was to own a company. That's what I wanted. When my dad asked me once, when I was a young teen, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I don't know, but I want a company. I want to be the big cheese. I want to be the boss. That was my goal, and I achieved that. I was a minority shareholder of the company, but I was CEO, and I had a great career. What I didn't have was balance.
Hmm.
So Rob, when we got married, and a couple of years later we had our first son, he became a stay-at-home dad. And just 16 months after our first one was born, we had identical twins. So we had 3 kids in 16 months, which was a lot. And maternity leave in Switzerland was very short. It was 10 weeks for the first pregnancy. It was 12 for the second. So when the boys, the twins, were 3 months old, and our older one, Leo, was not much older than that, um, 19 months old, I went back to work full time. And while Rob had agreed and offered to put his career on the back burner, and I was happy and had offered to forge ahead with mine, there was an imbalance. There was a lack of time for both of us. His career kept slipping behind the horizon because the school system doesn't lend itself well to both parents working full time when you have 3 young kids, or even working part time. Um, and for me, I was in the traditional role of whoever the main or sole breadwinner is, and I'd get up in the morning and leave often before the kids were up, and come home often after they'd gone to bed. And it was a lot of pressure and a lot of stress. And I loved my career. I really did. I loved the company I worked for. It was the role I'd always dreamt of, but there was an imbalance, and it was really hard. And Rob, who's originally from New Brunswick, got very homesick. We lived in a very small town. Stay-at-home mums know how hard it is and how isolated you can be. You can imagine in the early 2000s, he was the only man we knew who was a stay-at-home dad. We didn't know anyone else.
Mhm.
And there were some funny comments about that too, about that decision. So he was the one who suggested that we move, and I I couldn't get my head around it at first. I didn't want to. You know, my family's in Switzerland, my mum and dad, my sister, nephews. Um, and it was scary. It was a huge jump. But on the other hand, he had left everything behind when he moved to Switzerland after we'd met. He then left his career behind and put it on the back burner. And I thought, you know, he's done all this. Maybe it's up to me now to give back, in a sense, to let him follow his career ambitions. And so we moved, and it was exceedingly hard. I started up my company here in recruitment, a different spin on recruitment, and it failed, which was horrible. Because professionally I'd never failed at anything, and I know that sounds really conceited, but I hadn't. So that was a real wake-up call, very humbling experience. But it also made me think about what I wanted to do next. And it was really Rob who said, you know, if you could do anything, what would you do? What would it be? And after a lot of soul searching, I said, well, I'd kind of like to try and write a book. And he said, well, do it now. Do it now before you do. Let me, and he started up his own company. He's an electrician by trade. It's done really well, which is fantastic. So I was able to devote my time to writing and helping him build the business on the side. And that's how I came to writing. So if I hadn't taken that leap, if we'd stayed in Switzerland and I'd stuck with the job in recruitment, I don't think I'd be writing books.
Wow. Wow. So I'm curious if the skills that you developed in your career path prior to writing, like inform the way you work on your books and kind of feed the fire of your fiction. I mean, you know.
Yeah, so I'd say that there are a number of things that I could take from my professional experience and apply to writing. My mum would have called me, or used to call me, bloody minded. I would call it tenacious.
Interesting.
And I'm very wary of, say, deadlines. I'm very deadline driven.
Yeah.
And I'm always in competition with myself to see, not with anyone else, but with myself to see whether I can make that deadline, or preferably beat the deadline. Oh. So you give me a deadline, I'm going to see if I can do that thing, whatever it is you asked me earlier. That's kind of a game I would always play with myself, which is quite ridiculous. But it works. So that was very instrumental in setting myself deadlines and being very self-driven and saying, well, I don't have a publishing deal. I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to give it a go. And similarly, in my role in recruitment, before I was CEO, when I was chief operating officer or back office manager, whichever of the roles, as I grew with this company and we expanded the business, it was often project-based. So for example, we decided we were going to open an office in Germany, and that was my job. And I had no clue how to do that. Didn't have a clue, not the faintest idea, never done that before. But I knew I would find people who could help me. So in terms of doing research for my books and contacting people and saying, hi, I'm Hannah Mary McKinnon. Can you help me figure out how to hide a body? You know, that kind of thing doesn't faze me in the least. Public speaking doesn't bother me anymore because I did it so much for work, being very organized. In terms of my work, my previous career influencing my work, in The Neighbours, my first suspense novel, one of the characters was an IT recruiter. And in the one I've just written for next year, the protagonist is also in IT recruitment. And that was quite deliberate because it really, I think in the first one, it was because it felt comfortable. And in the one for next year, which is my 6th book, it just fit the story and the character. So in that sense, it influences it a little bit, but I don't draw on my work experiences per se to fit into my stories.
Yeah, or I was curious about that with okay, so I just finished Hannah's book. It's backwards. but it's You Will Remember Me Last Night, and it's terrific.
Thank you.
And there's that old adage about write what you know, right from life. So it sounds like you work in a way, like a structured, organized way. Maybe, I don't know if you set your own deadlines.
Yes. Well,
Yourself.
no, the publishers give me well, we discuss them and decide on them together, I would
Right.
say.
But for instance, writing a certain amount a day.
Yes, I do that.
You do that.
I do.
How much do you write a day in order? You've been putting out books nearly every year.
Yeah, I've had well, the first one was 2016, and then from 2018 onwards, it's been one a year. So I'm a very methodical plotter. I'm not what we call a pantser, someone who doesn't plot
Right.
or who doesn't. I plot before I start writing rather than plotting on the page. That's
Mhm.
probably the better way of explaining it. And I have a whole method that sounds really stilted and scientific, and I have a plot. I have a beginning and an end in mind, and things change, things change. But then I develop that I have a beginning and an end and a whole load of nothing in the middle. And then I develop beats of the story, the big things that happen, big stepping stones. And then I put smaller ones in between, and then I break those down even more. Somebody once said to me, "How do you eat an elephant?" And I looked at them, I said, "What are you talking about? With a knife and fork? What kind of a question is that?" And they said, "No, dummy, one bite at a time." Oh, so
Yeah.
for me, opening a blank Word document and thinking, I've got to write 90,000 words,
Right.
feels a little bit overwhelming. But if I break it down into, say, 30 chapters of 3,000 words, hey, that seems achievable.
Right.
That feels better. And so when I plot and then I actually sit down, and I've broken everything down and I sit down to write, I will pull out my calendar and see what I've got going on and figure out how many words roughly I think I can write on that day. Generally, I'd say it's about 2,000 minimum. If I have nothing else going on with the kids or events or whatever. I have been known to write double that if it's going really well. I have been known to write a few hundred if it's not going well.
Yeah. Just stopping and saying
Yes.
enough is enough.
Yes. Or skipping ahead or writing a different scene or.
Because so you
Right.
can.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess where I was going with that is, yes, these skills come from your previous work life. And you did mention this about having characters who worked in IT.
Yes.
Or recruitment.
Yes.
But when I was reading this book, I thought, I wonder if, and I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but what do you draw from what you've experienced or from life beyond the research you do to create these characters and this plot and even the setting? Maryland, right? And
yeah. So you mentioned before, write what you know, and I think I've heard that advice, and I think that's comfortable when you first set out on your writing journey. I think it feels safe and comfortable to write what you know. I don't know how to kill people. I have no experience in that, I assure you.
Sure.
And anyone watching. So there are many, many things that I know nothing about, but that's one of the great pleasures of writing, is to research that and find out and talk to people. Because you can't, if I just wrote about what I know, my range would be very limited. So I work very hard on developing my characters. For example, I spend a lot of time before I write chapter 1, I will develop them and interview them, which sounds really odd, but it's a 3-page questionnaire that I complete for my main characters. Things like obvious things like what they look like or what they sound like, or where they were born and their age, but then other things such as, do they believe in ghosts? Are they religious at all? How much money do they have in their bank account? Do they have a favorite joke? And if so, what is it? Did they get along with their parents? So there's all kinds of things that don't necessarily or at all come into the story, but they allow me to develop the characters so that they are almost real for me and layered,
Mm-hmm.
and also that they're not the same. Because if they all get along with their parents and they all did the same job and they all sound the same, look the same, then they will feel and read the same. So I spend a lot of time giving them backstory that doesn't necessarily come into the book. Some of it will, but not all of it by far. But to get them to the point where I start the story, what happened to them specifically? What have they gone through? What have they experienced? Where have they lived before the story starts?
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of setting, that's slightly different. So You Will Remember Me is set in Maryland and in Maine. I haven't been to Maryland, but I have been to Maine. So when we go to New Brunswick to visit Rob's family, our family in New Brunswick, we often drive through the US.
Mm-hmm.
And I organized a road trip where we stopped off in Maine and had a look around. And Sister Dear, which was last year's book, was set exclusively in Portland. And that was quite deliberate because I'd been there and we'd walked around and we'd spent the day and the whole day there and the evening there and had dinner there and overnight, so that I could get a good sense of the setting. But in You Will Remember Me, I made up towns in Maryland and in Maine. And I do that because it gives me creative liberty. So I don't offend anyone if I put a building in the wrong place, or
Right.
a road is a one-way street or something, or
Right. You're not married to a map.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. With your background, I'm wondering if you imagine yourself going in like international settings.
I have thought about it. I have. And I was writing a book, and I should probably dust it off and see what happens with it. I was writing a book that started in England and then went to France, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. I believe that was the plan. But it wasn't really suspensey enough. That was when I was I'd written The Neighbours That Had Sold, and I floated the idea because I'd been working on it for the next one, and they said, oh, but it's not a rom-com, and it's not suspense, it doesn't really fit. So I shelved it. So I have thought about it, but I think because I have a vastly North American audience,
Yeah.
the North American setting is preferred.
Well, I love a good international chase if you ever get around.
Yes, this is true.
So could you talk a little bit about the shift from rom-com to suspense,
Mm-hmm.
and what motivated you to do that? And I guess when you approach a rom-com and you're thinking about plot or ideas, is it a different experience than approaching a plot when you're thinking about suspense? Or do you bring the same sense of beats and, breakdown and things like that to it? So maybe start with how you made the choice.
So when I wrote Time After Time, that was my rom-com, which is it's a story about a woman who's in her early 40s who may or may not have some curly brown hair. You can see where I'm going with this. And she is unhappy with the choices she's made, or thinks she's unhappy with the choices she's made and where she's ended up in life. And she starts thinking specifically about what might have happened if she'd made different choices, and if she hadn't met her husband, but had, say, married her first boyfriend. And she wakes up, it's a bit of a Groundhog Day meets Sliding Doors book. It's the love child of those two. And so she wakes up one morning and she's lying in bed with her first boyfriend, who says they're married. And she's the only one who realizes, no, we're not. I have a husband and kids. And she's getting what she asked for. She's getting a glimpse of how her life might have turned out had she made these different choices. And I wrote that. We'd come to Canada. My company had failed. I was miserable. I felt really lost because my work was my identity. That was who I was. I didn't know what to do. And I just had this idea of that. It was a really strong idea, really. I must have been thinking about it for a while, but inspiration just seemed to strike out of nowhere. And I wrote that book really quickly. And I think looking back a decade later, it was probably because I needed to write myself a happy ending. That's almost how it felt,
Mhm.
And, Rob and I are absolutely fine. We've been married for 22 years, but every couple goes through ups and downs, and moving to a different country. Moving is stressful as it
Yeah.
is. Moving to another country is also stressful. Um, but I must say that looking back now, I think, I have such privilege coming to a country where I speak the language, and people look at me and think, oh, she's Canadian or whatever, which many other immigrants do not.
Yeah.
So if I could go back and give myself a stiff talking to stop being so self-indulgent, I would.
Yeah.
But at the time, I couldn't see that. So it was actually when I was writing my second one, which turned into The Neighbours, and time after time I'd found an agent, but it hadn't sold yet. We were in sub club, as we call it, in submission. It had gone out to editors, to publishers, and I was writing The Neighbours, and it felt darker and grittier, and things weren't going to work out for everyone. And I was at the library, picking up one of the boys, and I saw a book with a grey cover, big red letters that spelled creep, and a pair of handcuffs dangling from the second E.
Did you
And I
say
thought,
creep?
creep, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And I thought, oh, that looks interesting. So I picked it up and I read the back of the cover, and I took it home, and it was by Jennifer Hillier. And I loved it. And it reminded me of my love of thrillers. And as I was reading, I was thinking, my gosh, this is the kind of stuff I want to write. The
Mhm.
rom-com and stuff, I've got that up my system now. I love a good rom-com. I love it. But this is the kind of stuff, it's, my heart's pounding, and I'm trying to figure out who the bad guy is and what's going to happen. And I love it. I love it. Interestingly, or funnily enough, Jennifer is originally from Canada, was living in Seattle at the time. And a few years later, after maybe it was 2 or 3 years later, after The Neighbours had sold, and I was at BoucherCon, the murder mystery readers and writers convention, I saw Jennifer Hillier, and I gasped, and I walked up to her and interrupted rudely her conversation. I said, excuse me, I just have to tell you, I read your book, and you propelled me over to the dark side, and thank you. And we started chatting, and she was moving back to Canada, the same town, and we've become really close friends.
Wow.
And maybe you spotted in You Will Remember Me, there is an homage to Jennifer. I mention a book, a library book, and it is Creep by Jennifer Hillier, and that's an homage to an homage to our friendship and our just the discovery of well, her shoving me into suspense thanks to her book.
It's awesome. What a gift to she must, I mean, what a gift to receive and what a gift to give.
Oh, she's wonderful. She's
It
I,
has
I love I
inspiration.
love her books, and she's really been she's right been she was published before a number of years before I was, and she's just brilliant. She's fantastic, and we chat about stuff all the time.
That's wonderful. So are the is sorting out the beats, the movement of the novel different?
Is that different? I mean, to be honest, when I wrote Time After Time, I had no clue what I was doing. I just I just went for it. I had a vague idea, and I plotted some stuff. I still kind of
Outlined it.
intuitively and outlined it,
Mhm.
and it was clear after I'd done a number of drafts and I made tons of mistakes, and that's when I started taking creative writing classes, that even in a rom-com, you need to end a chapter on something that propels the reader forward, that makes them want to turn the page. So a mini cliffhanger of sorts. Doesn't have to be, oh my gosh, there's a psycho in the kitchen with a knife type thing that you might expect in a suspense, but it's just something that will make the reader want to find out what happens next.
Mhm.
So I don't think in that sense it's vastly different, to
Mhm.
be honest.
Mhm. Kind of always thinking about momentum.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, always propelling the reader forward. Yeah.
Yeah. So besides outlining and doing the interviews and all the things, the wonderful things you've talked about in terms of your writing process, do you, these sound, are there rituals you have around it or time? It sounds like, I don't know if you write at the same time, if you, I know one person who said like the best place to write is the basement, but with the window above your head. So you can't be distracted by the outside world, but you still get some natural light. I mean, I'm curious if you have a designated space or any kind of ritual to your process that's important.
I do. So the time of day that I write really depends on what's going on. I'm flexible with that. Sometimes I do my best work in the morning. Sometimes it's 10 o'clock at night. It really just depends. In terms of where I write, again, it depends on what I'm doing. So if I'm editing, I find it easier to sit where I am now, which is in the office I share with Rob, although he's out during the day, so I'm often alone. And the kids are older, so it's been easy in that sense, having them at home for school so much because of COVID. It hasn't been a huge distraction, actually. They've been fantastic. But if I'm editing, often I'll use two screens. So I'll have one open, say a document open on one screen where I'll pull stuff out that I don't like, and I'll copy and paste it over. So it's just easier in that sense. When I'm writing my initial, what I call a skeleton draft, which I would never show to anyone, not my editor. She would disown me. She'd run away, telling me I'm completely mad because it's very basic. It's very, two-dimensional characters and stilted dialogue and no description because I'm telling myself the story. It really is the bare bones. And when I write that, when I have my set word count for the day, I've discovered that up in the small spare bedroom upstairs that does have a view. It has a view of the courtyard and trees, which is very lovely. But the Wi-Fi connection's really bad.
Oh.
Yeah. And I have an old laptop. It's really a rubbish old laptop. And I'll sit up there. I'll leave my phone downstairs, switched off, and my productivity just goes through the roof because I'm not distracted. I can look out the window, but I'm really focused on what I'm doing. I don't suddenly think, oh, I wonder what's on Facebook, or well, what's in the news, or whatever it is, name the distraction.
Sure.
So that's my preferred place to draft and to do a first pass of the draft because I'm just so hyper focused on what I'm doing.
When you say to draft, do you mean that skeleton draft, or do you mean after the skeleton draft?
So probably my first skeleton draft, so the very first blank page, filling the blank page, and then going over that one or two times before I would then move down into the office, because also I need to do some research. I'll
Right.
flag something. Yeah, I would say highlight something, or I'm very visual. So one book, in Her Secret Son, it features a cabin in the woods. Also in You Will Remember Me, it features a Victorian house. So I would Google Victorian houses for You Will Remember Me and bring them up on the screen and describe what I saw, blend a couple of them together, and then what's the language for the turrety bit,
Yeah.
What do you call that? So that's when I would come back into the office because I need Google is then my best friend. Right. Which I can't do upstairs with the dodgy connection on a rubbish old laptop.
But research can be kind of a rabbit hole too.
Oh yes.
So if you're upstairs away from that and you highlight it, then you can, come down and
fill in the blanks.
Really focus on that, but not be distracted from momentum.
Exactly. That's right.
That's very smart. So speaking of the skeleton draft and your agent supposedly disowning you, which I doubt, but I have heard you say, like when you were talking about time after time being out and being rejected, still in the submission, what did you call it? The sub club?
In sub club, yes, and rejected often. How
do you deal with that? Or how did you? It sounds like you're not receiving that much rejection anymore, but.
Oh, I did. So, bless you. I wrote time after time in something ridiculous like 6 weeks. Sent it to my mum, who said, "This is great." perhaps
Thanks,
not the
Mother.
best quality check. It's lovely, but perhaps get somebody else as well to read it. And so I sent it out to agents, which really was a silly move. But honestly didn't really know what I was doing, and I hadn't really researched it. I just, well, I researched agents. I thought, yeah, fine, okay, I'll send it out. And it got rejected a lot. A few agents asked for the full manuscript, which I sent, but then it got rejected again. And a few were very kind and said, we really like the premise, but your execution is flawed. You need to work on the execution. And that was when I started taking writing classes and creative writing courses. So there was a lot of rejection. And I think what kept me going was my tenacity, I guess. That played a big part. Also, the fact that these agents said, we like the concept, but you need to work on the writing. I thought, okay, if I take some courses, I can do this. Mm-hmm. And also, I think from a very young age, again, my parents would probably tell me this, if I'm told that I can't do something, obviously something legal, obviously, I will do whatever I can to prove people wrong. Wow. Mainly myself. So not myself wrong, but to prove myself right. I wanted to, the more I was told or the more I was rejected, the more I thought, I'm going to show you, this book is going to sell, it's going to publish, and I'm going to do it. So it was just, at the beginning, it was almost to see if I could, it was just to prove the people who had passed on the book that I was going to get this thing published, and it was going to be traditionally published and not self-published, because then they would have turned around and said, yeah, but you only self-published it, so that doesn't count, which is not what I'm saying about self-published books at all. So I think that's what it was. It was just this desire to, once I decided I want to write a book and be traditionally published, that's what I decided. That's where I wanted to end up. And I think, there are many, many, many authors who give up. And I think the path, I've said this before, the path to publication is littered with the fictional corpses of the characters that authors gave up on. Great characters, fantastic characters, but rejection is hard. It's really hard to keep going. But having worked in sales, also, because when I was in IT recruitment, they put me on the sales side, and I dealt with a lot of rejection there. My boss always used to say, every no is one no closer to yes. It's a numbers game. And that just stuck in my head. And I thought, I'm just going to polish this manuscript. I'm going to keep going. As long as people are interested and they're saying the concept is good, there's something there. And I've just got to stick with it. And I'm really glad I did.
I hope writers out there hear that. That's such a wonderful, I hear so much about, well, you just have to develop a thick skin.
Yeah. And yeah.
But what you're saying is allow it to be a motivator.
Yes. Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely. Absolutely.
Nice way to, another way of looking at it that I actually find more positive and attractive.
Yes, I think I remember when I was a kid and applying for apprenticeship spots, I got rejected for a hotel, and they said, well, and my marks were really good, but I was in a different stream, and school is very complicated. But anyway, I won't go into the details of it, and I promise this has a point. But I remember one of the places, it was a hotel, wrote back and said, we think maybe instead of doing this degree, you should do this one, which was a lesser degree. It was a 2 year instead of a 3. And I thought, you what? No way. And so I ended up staying in Geneva, moving to Geneva, taking the higher degree in French, which I had just learned, and graduated 3 years later with high honors. So I thought, ha!
Yeah.
So it's that kind of, yes, if you can, I mean, and don't get me wrong, when I receive rejection letters, it's horrible and it's disheartening, and you think, oh, why? Especially if they've asked for the full manuscript. But if you can capture that, allow yourself to feel that and think, ugh, but I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
going to do this, and keep going, because one thing I know for sure is if you give up, you won't get published.
Yeah. Right.
That's a certainty.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so when Time After Time sold, it was picked up by Avon
Yes.
HarperCollins in the UK,
Yes.
right? And then the next three novels, The Neighbors, Her Secret Son, and Sister Dear, all of which are really interesting titles, I think, along with You Will Remember Me and your upcoming
Yes,
sixth
the one for next
novel,
year. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which is wonderful, and congratulations,
Thank you.
were and will be published by Mira Books,
Yes.
which is based in the US. And I'm
Yes.
just curious what the differences are. Well, first of all, why you made the switch. And then if you can pinpoint differences between publishing in the UK and publishing with a company in the US.
So it was a very different experience. So Avon HarperCollins UK acquired Time After Time in their digital first program, which meant that their strategy was, we're going to publish it as an ebook, and then if it does well, we'll release it in paperback. And it's only available in digital, which tells you all you need to know about the numbers. It's done okay, but it's certainly not breaking any records. What it did allow us to do, what it allowed my agent to do, was to submit The Neighbors to other publishers and say, this is not her debut, this is her second book, which gave me I guess a little bit of street cred.
Wow.
So the reason why we didn't stick with Avon was because they wanted to take The Neighbors again with their digital first strategy. And for me, that was a bit unsettling, because I had no expectations going in, because I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know how this was going to be. But certainly what I realized is that, and maybe things have changed now, but because with social media, things change so quickly. But in 2016, promoting an ebook was a lot harder than promoting something that you can hold in your hands, and it doesn't go into stores, and you have to people won't stumble across it. They might stumble across it online, but they won't stumble across it at the bookstore or the library or wherever or Walmart or Target or whatever. So it was quite a deliberate strategy on our behalf. Avon had offered to acquire The Neighbors with their digital first, and we passed. We turned them down, which was really, a white knuckle ride, until Mira, which is part of HarperCollins US, so still HarperCollins, but a different division or different company, until they gave me a 2-book deal with The Neighbors and Her Secret Son. And that was a very, very different experience, because I think proximity really helped, because the team's in Toronto, so I could actually go in and meet them and see them, because they work all across North America from Toronto, and have HarperCollins in the US as well, of course, but sales and marketing, a lot of people are based here. So that was very, very different. The editorial process was quite different as well. There were a lot more and heavier edits on The Neighbors than Time After Time. I'd like to think that was because Time After Time was just, it was so well written, it didn't, because my mum said so, it didn't need that many edits, but or maybe it was just because we'd done so many passes and my agent had done so many passes with me. But it was just a very different experience. And honestly, walking into the bookshop, not just that, but before receiving the proof copies, because we received early copies, proof copies of our novels before the finished product, and holding my book in my hands the first time was extraordinary. And walking into the bookstore, walking into Walmart and seeing it on the shelf there and just grinning, because my book, first my book, I wrote that, was overwhelming and lovely and quite extraordinary. And that feeling never goes away. That never gets old.
Right. Well, I'm remembering the way you described seeing Creep, right?
Yes.
In the library. So again, with the digital, just the beauty of a cover, and image is also everything in terms of sales in some ways.
Yes.
So for books.
Yes.
So to see it face out like that I imagine must have been, people might be attracted to it the way you were attracted to Creep.
Right. Right. Like wine. Not that I drink a lot of wine, but I'll look at the labels, and if the label's
Sure.
pretty, I'm more inclined to pick it up.
Right. So I'm just curious, given, sounds like you sell your novels in advance on proposal. Is that
Yes.
correct?
At this point,
So
yes.
how do you come up with the ideas for them?
So it's quite funny. I can pinpoint each of them, and for you will remember me specifically. It was a news article about a gentleman a few years ago. A gentleman from Toronto went missing on a ski hill in Lake Placid, and he was presumed dead. I mean, he was missing, presumed dead. They looked for him for days and couldn't find him. And about 6 days later, he showed up in Sacramento.
Oh, wow.
And he had amnesia. And he knew that he'd gone cross country in a truck. They never found the truck driver, but he was still in his ski gear. And he didn't know why he was there. He didn't know who he was. I believe he either had a card or he remembered a phone number or partial phone number or something. And they made contact with his wife, who had no clue why he was in Sacramento. I mean, obviously she was overjoyed, but everybody had thought basically he'd perished on the ski hill, and somebody would come across his body at some point. And I remember thinking, my gosh, what an extraordinary story. How on earth did that happen? And how that must have felt for his wife, just him disappearing, but also for him not realizing who he was or where he was or what was going on. And then my thriller brain kicked in, and I remember thinking, what possibly could have gone wrong?
Right. And why did he wind up in Sacramento?
Why did he wind up there? And what happens if he goes home and it's not really where he wants to be?
Yeah.
And everything worked out for the gentleman. Everything was fine, and he made his way home and safe and sound. And but I just thought that's an extraordinary story, and that was the little gem of an idea. And then I just kept having this image of a man waking up on a beach and not knowing who he is or where he is, and people looking for him, and everything snowballed from there.
Wow, that's super interesting. I'm looking at the time, and I'm loving this so much. I want to ask a couple more questions, but I also want to allow time for the Q&A with the audience. So I maybe quickly, like in one or like a sentence or two, is there anything you wish you'd known earlier about the writing or the publishing process that you could tell to the writers in the audience?
I wish I'd taken a few creative writing courses first.
Got it.
Yes.
They really cracked it open for you, or?
I think that I would have avoided a lot of mistakes. I think if I'd had my work critiqued properly before, no disrespect to my mum, but I think that would have been really, really insightful and helpful. And I know that it's nerve-wracking to do that. It's because it's your work and it feels very personal, but it's the best thing you can do. Because if you want to get published and you put your work out there and you do get published, people are going to read it anyway.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you for that. And then I wanted to talk to you about this venture you have going, which is you offer your services to other writers as a professional editor. And then in March 2020, which was right when the pandemic started, you launched a website called First Chapter Fun, which I'm definitely going to check out. I checked it out, but I do want to do more than check it out, which helps authors and publishers promote their books in a different way.
Yes.
And so you're promoting other authors, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And I love when writers are generous, and I think they often very are with, and this seems
Very
like
much so.
an example of great generosity. So how do you show your support of other writers and also publishers there?
So First Chapter Fun came up during the pandemic or just at the start. So COVID had just hit here.
Hmm.
And there were 14 of us on a Facebook Messenger chat, 14 authors, basically freaking out, saying, we've got books publishing. Sister Dear was publishing in May. How is this going to work? How, all of our events were being cancelled. We hadn't pivoted to virtual. Yeah, I had library events and tons of things and a book launch. And we just sitting there thinking, what can we do? And it was March 16th at 7:15 p.m. And I said to them, well, what if I read the first chapter of your books online?
Hmm.
And I thought maybe a dozen people, half a dozen people would say, yeah, go on, then do that. But it was way more than that. Instantly, people said, yes, that would be so much fun. Please do that. Pick me, pick me. And so I started the very next day at 11:30. The very next day, I had a graphic and off I went. I mean, it was really just on a whim. And I think within it was under a week, I had about 40 reads planned every day of the week, including Saturday and Sundays at 11:30. And it became this bubble of fun, hence First Chapter Fun, I suppose. And that's what we called it initially. It was Listen with Hannah or something, First Chapter Fun, where I would read the first chapter and talk about the book and talk about the author and basically give them a different way of promoting themselves, but also enticing readers just with a teaser, just with the first chapter. And initially it was only supposed to last until May, because until Sister Dear came out. And Hank Philippi Ryan, my partner in fictional crime, powerhouse author, she contacted me. I read for her and she said, what if we partnered up? What if we did this? What if we continued and did this together? So we created a Facebook page, First Chapter Fun, or a group, I should say, First Chapter Fun, an Instagram account, First Chapter Fun. And now we read twice a week, or we have been for a year now, reading twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday at 12:30 p.m. And we have reads booked up until the end of the year and beyond. So we broadcast on Facebook and Instagram at the same time with two devices. So steep technological learning curve. And we just love to be able to bring new to you or new authors to people who watch. And it's so much fun. It's really become a community. It really has, very organically. We haven't advertised it. We have swag now. People asked us, could you, because there are some catchphrases or things I say that suddenly became a catchphrase, because I always signed off the broadcasts as stay safe, stay kind. And that became one of the things. So we have t-shirts and aprons, because people said, we want a t-shirt. So we thought, okay, and did that, okay, you asked, here you were. And it's just absolutely wonderful, because I found when I first came into the writing community, I came from IT recruitment, which was pretty cutthroat and competitive.
Yeah.
A lovely organization that I worked for, but in the industry as a whole. And the collaboration and the support that I found in the writing community is like nothing I've ever experienced. And it goes beyond the writing community, it's the book community.
Yeah.
And I think it's because in terms of writers, if somebody reads my book, that doesn't mean they're not going to read anybody else's. Right. They buy someone else's, they might get mine from the library or buy a copy or borrow a copy or talk about it, or whatever it is. And so it just doesn't have this competitive feel. When somebody posts something about a book deal or a movie deal or a New York Times review or whatever it is, we all celebrate that. And it's so genuine. It's for me as an author, I think the biggest surprise of this second career, and it's truly wonderful. So it's First Chapter Fun is just our way of paying that forward.
That's wonderful. I love hearing about that. And who doesn't love to be read to,
Right.
right?
Same. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. I think we have, oh my goodness, can we ask a few
Of
questions
course.
yet?
Yes. I'm
Um,
yours as long as you'd like.
okay, wonderful. Courtney, are you able to help us with that?
Yes, I am. 1 second. Okay, let me pin you guys here. So if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A below on your screen there. I think you've done such a good job of explaining all about your writing process, and I love all the positivity in the writing community and the motivation when you do get rejections. I mean, I could listen to you talk all night,
Oh,
especially with your
thank you.
accent, but
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
so yes, if anyone has questions, I actually wanted to ask a question just to get things started. How has writing changed for you during the pandemic, Hannah?
It was a tough year. I won't lie. When it first hit, and I think that's why First Chapter Fun was also so good for me, selfishly, personally. I was a bit stunned, to be honest, and looking at the numbers of cases, and this was when there were 150,000 worldwide, which is nothing. Um, for those who aren't sick, of course, I'm not downplaying it in any way. So I was panicking and freaking out. And my husband, Robbie, said, just stop watching the news. I said, I can't stop watching the news. He said, yes, you can. You need to for your own sanity. Just stop obsessing so much. And he was right, which he often is. He's very grounded. And he said, just step away from it and focus on something else. And I focused on First Chapter Fun. And I think that then helped me go back to my writing, go back to my manuscript, and really focus on that. And then, unfortunately, my mum passed away in July, which was really difficult because she's in Switzerland, and I couldn't go. And again, writing provided me an escape because I had my sixth book, the one for next year, to work on, and it gave me a place that I could just go into and escape into and not think about anything else. So I think in terms of initially, the pandemic was awfully unsettling and unnerving. And then I realized, again, Rob said, the one thing we can control is our family of five. So let's focus on that. That's the one thing we know we can keep safe. We can have a direct impact on. So let's focus on that and make sure that we are safe. And writing really helped me with that, the whole writing community, and being able to pivot online and see people and talk to people online was really helpful too.
Thank you for sharing that. So sorry to hear about your mother. And
Oh, thank you.
it has been just a difficult year for everyone. So, and there were some comments in the chat I wanted to share. Jean said, "How interesting to hear how you found your way to writing earlier in the interview." Carla says, "Love Hannah and her books, and also First Chapter Fun." So we'll find that link and put that in the chat in just a second. And then Nancy asks, "Do you have characters that you like waiting in the wings, waiting to fit into a story?"
I have a couple. I have one, honestly, where I have a couple, as in a married couple, or yeah, we'll call them a married couple, where I have the woman jabbering in one ear and the man, the husband, saying she's lying, and that's all I've got. But I know there's going to be something there, and she's lying, and I think he's probably lying, and I haven't yet figured out what the story is. But yes, they're waiting in the wings. I'm sure they'll turn up at some point.
Excellent. Our next question, have you had to give up a character or a location that you thought was going to be fabulous, and how did you move past it?
Yes, in The Neighbours, I remember my editor. The Neighbours is a dual timeline, so there are chapters set in the past and chapters set in the present. And I had this wonderful chapter with Nate, one of the protagonists, and his grandfather. And it was a lovely chapter that it was just so, it was them chatting. Nate was a young boy, and he was talking to his grandfather about his war medals, and it was a lovely scene. And my editor called me, she said, "This is a lovely scene, it's lovely, but it doesn't do anything. It's gotta go." And I was heartbroken. No, I wasn't heartbroken. I could see her point. It wasn't doing anything. If you have a dual timeline, your chapters in the past need to do something to move the chapters in the present forward. And she said, "We already know Nate's a great guy, and it's different, but it's just emphasizes he's a great guy. So it's got to go." So I copied it and I took it out and I put it in a separate document and I saved it. So I still have it just in case I want to read it. I haven't, but just in case I want to read it again.
Okay, and our next question, in my estimation, First Chapter Fun is the best new thing to be created during the pandemic. How have you managed to balance your time between writing, promoting others, and your family?
That's been a tough one. I will not lie that it has been a lot of work, because reading half an hour once a week now, and Hank reads half an hour once a week. It doesn't seem like much, but there's a lot of prep that goes on posting, and Hank does these teaser videos, which are incredible. Twice a week. She just blows my mind with these teaser videos that she makes. So it has been tough. And I will say, honestly, my workouts, they've fallen a little bit by the wayside. So I'm looking forward to getting back to those. I went a bit too far on the not having a work-life balance again, but because I love my work so much, it doesn't feel like work sometimes, so yeah, I need to adjust that a little bit, but I'm getting there. I'm almost there. I'm getting there.
That's the best way, when it doesn't feel like work. So
It is.
Oh, and Carla says, plus I'm sure you need a little time for reading. So
Every night.
as we all do. So, well, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A or the chat, and I think that is a good place to stop, as we're a little bit over an hour. So I want to thank everyone for joining us, and thank you, especially Hannah, our guest of honor tonight.
Oh, thank you.
For being here with us all the way from Canada. Thank you, Karen, for interviewing Hannah. Thank you both so much. So thank you. And if there's nothing else, I think everyone have a wonderful night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen.